Hey everybody, Alex here, and welcome to part 3 of the Final Fantasy XI retrospective. And we have 2 Diet Cokes today, because this is going to be, I don't think a long one, but it's a very packed one. So, when we left off, we were finally hitting our stride as a Link Shell. You know, we were claiming notorious monsters, we were steadily increasing our game, we were starting to get gear, and people were actively trying to join up with us. We weren't begging anymore. But with that being said, when it comes to seniority and getting drops and all this other stuff, and we were primarily doing what we knew as Sky, which was basically Rulu Gardens, which is basically a floating continent that had the 4 gods, north, south, east, and west, Siriu, Suzaku, Byaku, and Genbu, the turtle god, who I soloed as a thief. Never do that. Never do that. Took hours. And then Kieran, which became a Monday night ritual for us. But, it reaches a point where there's only so much stuff you can get. And, ultimately these drop rates were very low. So you would always get something, but you wouldn't always necessarily get what you wanted. So we had a lot of folks that would be like next in line for, a fancy pair of boots for months. So we had to actually halt our recruitment because people would join thinking, oh, we're going to get stuff. And then they never got it because the line never moved. So when Rusty decided he wanted to start to do Dynamis, which is an instanced-based, I guess you could say, dungeon crawl through the main capital cities. And by instance, I mean like only one group could go in at a time. So sometimes we actually had to schedule with other Link Shells to figure out who was doing which country on what day so that we didn't overlap. So for Dynamis, I think we always went on Thursdays because it reset every 72 hours. So on Thursdays, it was us and 2 other Link Shells, so we had a rotation going, and this was all like predetermined between Rusty and their Link Shell leaders. So for the purpose of Dynamis, the way we handled recruitment for that was if you were a member of the main tactics Link Shell, you were automatically allowed to join the Dynamis Link Shell if you wanted to. If you didn't want to, that's fine. It had a different set of seniority and drop rate priority and all that stuff. And then we actively recruited for that. And the good news with that is it really expanded our social networks, right? So started to talk to even more people. And this is where, and I'm going to step out of the game itself for a moment and touch on my personal life. This is where the lines between an MMO in a virtual space and personal life in the reality space start to blend together. So my real life buddy, who obviously I haven't given any names at this point, and I don't plan to, he had connected with somebody else, and he found out they also lived in Queens, New York. And, they started talking, they went to the same places. They went to the Queens Mall, like all that stuff. They just never bumped into each other. They didn't even know each other. So she had decided that she was going to do a little get-together at the house with a bunch of strangers for everybody who was local at the time. Fact of the matter is, her fiance played the game too, and they were also a member of the same Link Shell together, and their roommate also played the game, and he was also a member of that Link Shell. So she felt kind of safe. And she had invited him over, along with his girlfriend at the time. And, he asked if it was okay if, Alex could come. And she's like, who's Alex? And he's like, oh, it's Alcindor. She's like, oh, I don't know who that is. And he's like, oh, he's a friend of mine. I've known him for years. He's cool people. He likes to drink. He'll have a good time with him. And she was kind of hesitant because she's like, I really don't know who this person is. So he was like, well, it's up to you. So she was like, you know what? Who cares? I'm surrounded by people. I feel safe. Of course he can come. So he messages me and he tells me, hey, do you want to go to so-and-so's house for a little get-together? I guess it's like a birthday sort of thing. And I was like, okay, cool. Where is it? And he tells me it's out in like Maspeth, Queens, which really isn't all that far, but I'm like not familiar with the area at that point. So I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll go. So now I'm meeting people in real life because of this game. And at the time, I was really trying to get my health together for the first time. And I was doing intermittent fasting before it was trendy and cool. So it took so long to get there, and we were so late that I was like on the verge of exiting my eating window, and I get very hangry. So the first words that this young lady heard out of my mouth was me munching on a gyro from a hot dog cart because I was starving at that point, and I wouldn't be able to eat for like another 18 hours. So so my friend is like, oh, and there's Alcender, and I just look at her, and I have tzatziki sauce leaking from my mouth, and I go, sweet, sweet gyro. And to this day, she always makes fun of me about that. So we went to the party, and we had a good time. We played Smash Brothers on the GameCube and all that stuff. And, we basically talked, and we got to know each other personally. And she became one of my closest friends for many, many years. And I truthfully hung out with them more than my real life buddy for several years. And she was actually the person that really helped me through a lot of dark times in my life. I remember when, this is several years ago, even after we stopped playing the game, I was going through a lot of stuff at work, and it was very stressful, and I just wasn't sure where I was professionally or personally at that point. And she said to me, listen, I'm going to Otakon this weekend with my sister-in-law. Do you want to come? Truthfully, it's supposed to be a girls' trip, but I knew her personally as well. She's like, but I think if it's you, she'll be okay with it. And I said, yeah, she's like, listen, you don't even have to hang out with us. Just do your own thing. And I agreed. And, she ran it by her sister-in-law, and she was like, oh, yeah, if it's Alex, that's perfectly cool. So the three of us got a room, and I'll be honest, spending the weekend with the two of them just pulled out every negative aspect that I've been clinging on to for months. And I came back rejuvenated, and I ultimately decided to leave the hotel I was working at and go on to a big brand hotel. A bunch of you guys know who I used to work for. So that was really the push that made me do it and just realize that life isn't so bad. And then when we went back the following year, I went with her now husband, who also played the game, and the same roommate, because I think he'd moved out at that point. And it was like we were 15 years old again. It was an absolute blast. And it's really funny because at that point we all hadn't played the game for several years, but we still talked about it. And we reminisced about when we started to go to Dynamis and all that other stuff in that first party. And she even said, she goes, I'll never forget, Al, the first things he said to me were sweet, sweet gyro. And I'm like, why do you still talk about that? We have so many more jokes in between then and now. But that's always the one that stuck out in the back of her mind. But after this party, during this party, I was talking to them how we had started a Dynamis link shell and that we were actively recruiting people, and it was still fresh enough where the seniority line wasn't so bad. So they had joined up. And the contingency to them joining up was items to go into Limbus, which is yet another piece of instance content that I really think Square Enix put in there because the real money trading guys had really leveled up their game at this point, and they were actually claiming the harder Notorious monsters, getting drops that included the Riddle, which is a sword that attacks 2 to 3 times. The Kraken Club, which is a club that attacks 2 to 8 times. So you can imagine as a thief with triple attack and subbing Warrior, which gives you double attack, and then using the rings and the earrings, getting plus double attack and plus triple attack, and then using one of those things. I mean, honestly, you would die immediately because you would just draw so much aggro, you could never pull it off. But it was freaking impressive just to see somebody go like, and then fall down dead. It was like the funniest thing you would ever see. So Limbus started to have some of those monsters, not necessarily the drops, but like equivalent stuff where you could technically get away with it. And we were doing that in between Dynamis, in between Sky, in between the normal Notorious monsters. So when I say an MMO with real life and digital life start to blend together, it really does. I am talking to these people offline. We are texting. We are calling each other. And we're playing the game together at night. we're emailing each other during work. Yo, listen, da 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 da. This is what happened. Oh, I would randomly get an email from Rusty. It would just say TOD, the name of the notorious monster, and it would just be all in the subject line so I knew when I got home. And it got too big too fast. Now Rusty realized I can't do all this by myself. I need to expand. I need to have, for lack of a better word, an executive committee. So, as one of the oldest members, I was made director of special projects. And what special projects did, and that was the name I came up with, and I made myself director of special projects and promotions. Special projects was in charge of coming up with anything you could to potentially break the game. Odd party configurations to work under any situation. And case in point, it was discovered that, and believe it or not, a bard song known as mazurka, which can make you run faster, had, I think, more enmity behind it than provoke, which is like the enmity generating ability a warrior gets, and flash, which is the enmity generating ability a paladin gets. So technically, a bard could tank. So Rusty had read about this, and he goes, "Oh, Alex and special projects, they'll figure out how to do this, no problem." I got to tank Nidhogg as a bard, and it was probably the coolest thing I ever did, and it was the stupidest fucking thing. I was basically wearing nothing but haste gear. I was subbing ninjas, so I had shadows, and I was just singing at a fucking dragon the whole time, and I never lost aggro. And everybody's like, "This is fucking ridiculous. How is this possible?" They eventually fixed it because my buddy Palpatine was also doing it too. And we were like, at this point, he was main bard and I had leveled up bard just for the purpose of utility and special projects and promotions. And, he and I were just trading secrets back and forth. Like, hey, if you do it this, oh, do you have this gear? Oh, can I borrow it? Competing link shells are now helping each other out because the real money trading thing is so bad that we would rather give it to one of our competitors as opposed to them. Plus, we were all doing dynamics together at this point, so we were all just talking, hanging out. People would come to New York on vacation, I'd meet up with them. It became a little too much. Now, in terms of the personal life aspect of it, I was still in college. And my personal life in college had really started to, for lack of a better word, downgrade. I was now sophomore, junior, going into senior. 3 years. My social life in college drastically changed because now people were figuring out their majors. We weren't just doing the prereq stuff anymore. So the people I hung out with, we all got spread around. And some classes were required depending on what your major was. Like I did economics, so I had to take a bunch of econ classes. One of my buddies, he went into accounting and finance, so I didn't necessarily have to take the same classes he took. Bunch of my friends went into radio. My school had a big acting component, so a bunch of folks did theater and all this other stuff. I picked those up as electives just to, pull the GPA up. But, it sucked. So I would go as class, I'd hang out, do all that stuff, and then I'd go home and play Final Fantasy XI, and that became my social life. And with all this expansion, with all of this social networking going on and everything else, eventually it is inevitable that people start to get thirsty. And we had, for lack of a better word, a problem with that. Relationships in MMOs are nothing new. But when you involve people who are starved for attention, who may not be getting that social thing on the outside, who may be awkward on the outside, and this game is their escape, stuff starts to get a little real too fast. And for lack of a better word, some conversations tend to go a little too dark. Some conversations tend to get a little bit too sexual. Some conversations tend to be a little predatory. And luckily, I was too aloof to figure out any of this stuff. We had one particular individual who would basically chase after whoever was top ranking in terms of gear at the time. So it was kind of this is going to sound terrible. It was kind of a joke. It's like, when's it my turn? And let's just say sexting became. YouTube is gonna love this one. Sexting became a bit of a problem with people in the link shell, to the point where Rusty actually had to go about and just say, "Listen, you guys do you, but if it is affecting our performance as a link shell, one of you gotta go. Like, I just will not tolerate it." And people would clean up their act, so there's no problem with that, but we also didn't know technically who people were, who they were in real life. Were they guys masquerading as women? Were they women masquerading as men? Nobody knew. It was basically just sight unseen. And in the case of myself, I had somebody chasing after me at one point, and I had none of it. I was just like, listen, like, at this point, I had a girlfriend. I was just like, a real life one. I was just like, no, listen, I'm good. Like, you can do whatever you want. And I would talk to a couple of the other people. So Kadari, that same white mage, she was basically what she called as white mage dictator. So she was in charge of basically the healing team. So any sort of support class, she was in charge of that. My real life buddy, he was second in command. He acted as, I guess you could say, strategy. And then we had a third person. Then we had another person who I can't give his name because I know he watches the videos. And he became basically king of damage dealing. Not because he was the best damage dealer. It was because he knew all the calculations to maximize damage. And we made fun of him all the time. He was the youngest kid in the crew. He was like 14 when he joined up with us. He's now happily married. And it's crazy to think, like, we basically saw this kid grow up, and truthfully, he's doing much better than all of us. But yeah, and it was like a joke. He'd be like, "Oh," everybody knew. He was very open about it. He's like, "Oh, like, I'm 14 years old," and I was like, "What the fuck? Like, I'm in college. Why the hell am I listening to you?" And he's like, "Because I do more damage than you." And he was just messing around. But ultimately, people respected him. But he was like comic relief for the group, and he totally just fell into that. And again, you incorporate all of this into a dynamic link shell with even more personalities, it just becomes even more complicated. And this is where the animosity started to come in. Because now people are calling, hey, this person's gotten all these drops. He's like, oh, but he's been with the link shell for 5 years or 4 years. Hey, this person was like, playing kissy kissy hug hug with this person, so now there's seniority. It was a mess. And we had a link shell meeting about it, and ultimately Rusty was kind of just like, listen, this isn't a fucking company. Like, this is a game, right? Like my real job, doing like promotions and events, is way easier than this. Like, I'm out. And he quit, but he quiet quit. And by quiet quit, I mean he just didn't log in as much. He had real life stuff to do. So it really came down to myself, my real life buddy, Kadari, and a few others to pick up the slack. And this is where the other lady I met personally, she came into the link shell full time with her husband. And, we were kind of like, just like, listen, like, you and I got to like try to rein this in. Otherwise, this is going to collapse in on itself. And we had a couple of months where it was a little touch and go. Like, we were basically leveling up. We weren't going to claim stuff anymore. When you lose the Hydra, not the Hydra loses a head, it gains a head. When you lose the king or the leader, people tend to float around because everybody saw me as the director of special projects. Everybody saw Kadari as support. They didn't see them as elite. So I did the only logical thing at the time, which was to level up Paladin and try to assume the role of main tank for the link shell. And I'll be honest, I got pretty fucking good at it. And I tanked stuff that Rusty hadn't tanked. And everybody was like, yo, no, if Alex is tanking, like, I trust him. Because I had fun with it. I was now doing Paladin sub Red Mage. I was, again, special projects and promotions. We were trying to come up with crazy ways just to maximize ourselves. So, case in point, one day the link shell, again, we're a little haphazard at this point, and Dynamis had really done a number on our roster because people quit. Both Dynamis and the main link shell, just because we weren't going as much. We never had enough people. People complain we didn't do Dynamis Zarkabard a lot. And for those of you screaming, I want to know more about Dynamis, I'm going to get to it in a minute. So I decided that we were going to go fight Jormungand. And Jormungand, the world serpent, is all the way in the top of a mountain, completely out of the way, like an hour to get there. And as director of special projects and promotions, I scouted it out, saw the dragon was there. I'm like, okay, he's here. Nobody's bothered to fucking kill it. And there's a ton of ads all around the area. So I scope it out and I go, okay, I'm going to need a couple black mages over here. I'm going to need a bard or two to make sure that we have enough MP. And then I'm going to need a halfway decent tank with ice defense to survive. But the problem is we don't have enough people, so this fight's going to take really, really long. And we don't have, and I know Kedari can't do the whole thing by herself. And she even said, yeah, I can't do the whole thing by myself. So I went to the special projects and promotions team, and one of my good buddies on the team, who much like me, enjoyed breaking shit because it's fun, said, I can heal the main party. And I'm like, all right, how do you intend to heal the main party? He goes, Dragoon sub Black Mage. Dragoon sub Blue Mage. And I'm like, wait, what? He goes, dude, Cocoon is like 3 MP. Every time I cast it, my Wyvern heals. It draws all the aggro. I can resummon it, release it, 2-hour it. It doesn't matter. I will never, ever run out of fucking MP. It is all good. So I was like, all right, let's do it. Motherfucker healed the entire thing by himself. The entire thing. Literally just standing there the whole time and just casting Cocoon over and over again. When I put this up on the website, our website at the time, with pictures of everything going on and the total time and the drops and everything else, it rejuvenated people. They were like, okay, I want to come back to this. People started to figure their life out. People had gone out to the real world, realized it wasn't all that good, and Rusty came back. And now he was rejuvenated. He was like, all right, listen, special projects and promotions, you guys are out of your fucking mind. We're going after the Jailer of Love. And Jailer of Love had like this whole big thing behind it. It was like a several week process. I tanked that too as Paladin sub Red Mage. And then we got Absolute Virtue and he wiped us out in 2 minutes. Absolute Virtue could not even be beaten by the dev team, FYI. But going all the way back to Dynamis. Because Dynamis is really where stuff started to go left really bad for us before we were able to recover. Through basically sheer determination and stupidity. Dynamis ran way too long. Basically, you would go in there and you would fight to get time extensions. You basically got like 1 hour in there. And every time you fought a mini-boss, you got an extra 15 minutes. Now, the purpose of Dynamis was to get currency. The currency you would use to eventually get a relic weapon. Aegis being the main one for paladins because it would nullify damage randomly, as well as a few other ones I can't remember. We had one in the Link Shell, actually. We had the Dark Knight Greatsword, which was given to Angrist. He was our most senior Dark Knight. People were kind of like, why the fuck would you... And you get a special weapon skill with it, too. And people were like, why the fuck would you give it? He paid for the whole fucking thing, and it wasn't cheap. The other reason behind doing Dynamis is that you would get Artifact Armor level 2. So Artifact Armor was basically your token Final Fantasy armor, right? The stuff you always see in the pictures, the pixel art, all that stuff. So, truthfully, most of it was useless. But some of the AF2 stuff, as we called it, was actually pretty useful. Like the Black Mage hat had plus elemental skill, which helped you get past resistances and all that stuff. One of the more sought after ones was the Thief Gloves because it had Treasure Hunter +1 on it. The only other Treasure Hunter Plus item was a Thief Knife, which one other thief in our Link Shell had and I had. And the way to get a Thief Knife was to fight Tonberries. Now, if you guys know Tonberries have an ability called Everybody's Grudge. Every time you kill a Tonberry, Everybody's Grudge globally increases for you. So it doesn't matter if you fight Tonberries in Section A or Section B. A Tonberry in either section hits you with Everyone's Grudge, you get the whole thing. There was one Tonberry that dropped it. And I think his respawn rate was once every 24 hours. And it was out in the middle of the jungle, in a temple, in a room. And you always knew when he was due to pop because like 5 thieves would be standing around the room doing nothing. And then it would pop purple. Same thing. People using bots, real money traders, all that stuff. I fought that motherfucker 400 times, I think. And I'm exaggerating, but it felt like it. And I got it once. It wasn't rare exclusive. You could have several of them, apparently. At least if I remember, it wasn't rare. Yeah, it wasn't because you could sell it. And it sold for like, at one point I was even debating on just buying it because I was a millionaire at this point. It was like, I think 50 million gil and I had like 9999999. But, you know, as a thief, I was like, no, I got to do it the right way because I don't know if it was a real money trader who got it. And I got hit with, I think my highest everyone's grudge was 50,000 at least. And I had maybe like 900 HP. You could reset it eventually, but it was so painful. And the worst part is, thieves also have an ability where they can basically go invisible and drop aggro. By doing that, you kind of make it unclaimed. So I can't tell you how many people did that as a strategy to put like their shadows back up so they could not die and ultimately give the monster to someone else. It was painful to see. Every time I felt so bad, but stupid me, I would still claim it, you know, just because I had to do it. Anyway, so we were doing Dynamis. One day we finally had enough people for Zarkabard, and the drop rate on AF2 was so bad. It was like 1%. And, you know, despite me having leveled up Paladin, Bard, Ranger, Black Mage, Thief, and I was starting on, I think, Warrior at that point. Thief, I always said, was my number one. That was my favorite job to play. I was like a walking Benetton ad with the gear. You know, I always took prioritization to have my Thief leveled up first and geared up. It didn't matter that I had full Ranger. It didn't matter that I had full Bard. It didn't matter that I had full Black Mage. I wanted full Thief. You know, I was like, you know, that's where I'm going to go. So we decided, you know, based on not even seniority, just based on the fact that I had done so much. Everybody was like, listen, first Thief hands that drop, Alex gets them. So we were running late. We got every extension. Every single extension. We were almost to the Dynamis Lord, which is the last monster in the whole fucking thing. And it dropped. And it was like 2 a.m. And everybody was like, pass, 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 you know, because you would cast lots to see who would get it. And it was rare exclusive, so you couldn't trade it. So everybody's passing and passing and passing. People are messaging me, congratulations, congratulations. Oh my God, I'm so happy for you. We've been waiting for this. You deserve it. You've done so much for us, da 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 da. One person didn't pass. I cast a lot. It was a high lot. Didn't matter. I didn't have to worry about getting outlotted. One person didn't pass. We ran out of time. And when you run out of time, anything that is unaccounted for as a drop vanishes. Now, honestly, it would eventually drop. But it was like, I think, a 15-minute wait, and we only had 30 seconds left. So I never got the gloves. And the person who didn't pass fell asleep. I was furious. Now, my anger was so bad that I went out for a walk. I didn't even log out. I just left myself in Zarkabard. I went for a walk, and I came back 2 hours later. I was fuming. It was like 3 a.m. 4 or 5 a.m. at this point. I saw the sun come up. Fuming. And everybody was like, are you okay? Are you fine? The person who fell asleep apologized 1,000,000 times. I can't believe that happened. Eventually, we changed our policy for this whole thing where you had to put your hourglass in your inventory as a bazaar item. So if you did fall asleep, somebody could buy it to kick you out because this was bad. And this happened a bunch of times, to be completely honest. Not just with me, but like with people falling asleep and whatnot. So trust me, this policy really came into play a lot. But I was so angry that I literally went on our forum and I said, guys, I got to take a break. I'm not really easily angered, but the fact that I got so angry really, really bothered me. It was a video game. It was a digital fucking item. And I lost my mind for 2 hours over that. So I took a break. Didn't log in for, I think, two or 3 months. And I just debated on, oh, my light died. And I just debated on quitting the whole game altogether because I was just so angry. But here's the thing, though. I was still talking to people. I was still texting with people. I was still emailing people. I was still on the forum, watching people get drops, seeing people gear up. Special projects and promotions had all been disbanded at this point. Except for my Dragoon Sub Blue Mage guy who was determined to heal every fucking dragon in the game. And he built a whole thing around it, like a whole strategy. People emulated it. It was so good. And eventually I decided I was going to come back. But it took a lot. Rusty, at this point, his band had taken off. He played in an indie rock band. And he was touring a lot. So he relinquished control to another individual in our group who had also been around since the beginning. And he and I became close friends as well. And he and I actually went on a road trip to meet somebody else together, having not met each other personally before. And we had a fucking blast, man. It was so much fun. But, when I came back, I had to tell him, like, listen, I'm thinking about coming back. And he's like, okay, like, are you okay? Like, he felt terrible, too, because he was there. He was like, oh, are you okay? Your seniority, I can't give it back to you. And I was like, I don't care. I'll get it back the normal way. I had nothing else to do. And this is where an MMO is good and bad. It's good because it gives you that social interaction. But in that time that I was not playing the game, I was reading about the game. I was watching from afar. I was looking at all of this stuff pertaining to the game. I had nothing else. That's not good. And that's why I kind of say, like, all this expansion, all this stuff, we were number 2. We were bordering number 2, number 1 all the time at this point. We had a monopoly on Cerberus for 4 months. Nobody claimed him for 4 months. We were experts at that fight. We were experts on Fafnir. We were experts on Nidhogg. We were experts at King Behemoth at this point. And we made it a point just to try to come up with unconventional ways to fight stuff, just because it made it more interesting and fun. And I was watching all of it, and I missed it so much. So when I came back, I said, listen, if you don't want to give me back Director of Special Projects, that's perfectly cool, but I would at least like to do group updates. Like stories on the forum, just to make it a little bit more lively, highlight drops and exemplary, performances and all that stuff. And he was like, that's perfectly cool. You can do that. So I came up with a whole narrative for how I came back, how I was quote-unquote resurrected from the depths of Dynamis Zarkabard. And I came up with storylines for everybody. Like, all the main crew, like, how, like, they were progressing and, like, it was basically like I gave everybody, like, a D&D background. And everybody loved it. They were like, oh my god, like, this is so great. Like, when's the new version update? When's the next bit of the storyline? I want to know more about why Dame Edna is in this. And Dame Edna, in case you don't know, is like a famous British performer. But everybody was like, Dame Edna, and people were like watching it. And then we had there was a website where you could overdub Bollywood stuff. So I was doing that, changing the subtitles to ridiculous stuff in game with funny videos. And everybody ate it all up. And when I did eventually come back after like all this months of build-up and stuff, because I wanted to get into summer break, I came back and was basically told, you got to play Bard all the time. And at first I was like, that's not a problem. I don't care. And then I realized that's because every fucking Bard in the Link Shell quit because they weren't fighting different monsters. They weren't trying to get the latest and hottest gear, which included the Shahira Manteel, a piece of body armor that was dropped by Vertra, a dragon at the bottom of the catacombs, a dragon surrounded by the undead. You could not fight this thing without an army of monks punching or puppeteers punching the shit out of them. My grand return. That's what he wanted to fight. And we'll talk about that in the next video, which I'm going to call part 4. I've been Alex, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.